Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin. By far, the most inexplicable or bizarre rash of Bigfoot sightings occurred in the early 1970s in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. The documentation of these events were conducted by the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group. Oddly enough, perhaps they were in the right place at the right time. Stan Gordon assembled the organization. It is not your typical paranormal group. It was founded by necessity. 4 years before the group assembled, in 1965, an alleged object fell to the forest floor in Kecksburg, within Westmoreland County. It was seen soaring through the sky in Canada and 6 states on a December evening. The founding members of the Westmoreland investigative team were in the area for the crash, and the team was not impressed by the official explanations for what they had witnessed. They documented reports of an acorn-shaped craft, with stylized hieroglyphs that glowed white. They witnessed National Guard, Army, Air Force, scientists, and men in suits with civilian vehicles in the area for weeks. They documented these plain-clothed men paying teenagers to misdirect onlookers away from the site. They reported on the bizarre habit many people had of denying that anything unusual happened at all. They'd say, yeah, we saw a National Guard truck, but they didn't find anything. The team estimated that dozens, if not 100 people, from identifiable and unidentifiable organizations were on site for weeks after the crash, and that a presence would linger for years. They saw unmarked flatbed trucks arrive empty and leave full, concealed by canvas. They documented the official statement that nothing was found and nothing fell. So that is how the Westmoreland Investigative Group came to be. More or less by necessity, in their opinion. But when the group was founded, no one expected just how many calls they would receive, how many calls were made by or referrals from law enforcement, and how many of these calls were regarding what many call cryptids. The first calls the team received upon its immediate establishment were calls regarding thumping noises from indeterminable sources. More than a few of these were from law enforcement, who were fundamentally stumped. The team failed to determine the origin of these noises, but it was their opinion that the noises came from underground, and seismic activity could not be ruled out. But soon, the investigations would accelerate in frequency, strangeness, and intensity. In 1972, a woman claimed her mobile home was lifted off the ground on one side. She was only alerted to the nocturnal visitor by the barking of her small dog. 2 investigators documented the trailer had indeed been recently moved on one side. 2 men could not replicate the movement of the trailer with their combined strength. They would receive reports of disturbances on a regular basis from Superior Mobile Home Court. But of course, not all the reports of Sasquatch-like creatures were so relatively mundane. A couple of women driving one evening frantically reported that they saw a large hairy man running alongside a road bordering a forest preserve in Derry Township. Derry would prove to be within the epicenter of the peculiar occurrences, and give or take only 10 miles from where the alleged object crashed almost 10 years before this sighting. They said it was a Bigfoot. They also said that in one hand it held a glowing white orb. They said the orb wasn't shining brightly, but it was glowing. After the creature disappeared into the woods, they saw a bright beam of light appear, connected to a small red dot in the sky. On an October night in 1973, no less than 4 groups totaling 15 people filed independent reports of a bright red ball in the sky, about the size of a barn, they said. It was close to the ground, suspended about 100 feet in the air. A man named George Kowalczyk was one of many who saw this object, but he saw a lot more than the rest. An investigator named Dr. Paul Johnson interviewed George Kowalczyk. Kowalczyk was driving with his 2 nephews, identical twins, 10 years old, when they saw this bright red, though George called it rusty orange, orb coming down slow. He recalled a humming noise. He was on his way to drop off his nephews at his parents' house, and when he got there, his mom was frightened, but he said he had to go to check this out. The twin boys begged to come along, and he said sure, why not. The boys were curious, even though their grandparents protested. He drove down a dirt road on his dad's property, as far as the road could take them, to the object, coming down past an adjacent field, in the woods. Exiting the truck, George could no longer see the object, only its glow behind a thin row of trees. He said he would have saw it better if he was on just a little bit higher ground. One of the twins was excited, and the other wanted to leave. As they were trying to get a better view, one of the twins said there was something coming down a fence line through the field. Accompanying the creature was what he described as a baby-like cry. George said the creature following the fence line was tall, moving fairly slowly, and taking very long strides. The fence was made of railroad ties. The figure was over twice the height of the ties, though it was described as having a hunched back. Another, significantly smaller creature was behind it, and there was definitely a rhyme, if not reason, to their motion. The larger of the creatures would walk up to one of the railroad tie fence posts and make this, quote, baby crying noise, and then wait for the smaller creature to get to the post behind it. Kowalczyk attributed a very muted, quote, gurgling sound to the smaller creature. At this point, Kowalczyk retrieved his .30-06 and a handful of tracer rounds from the truck. He fired a tracer in the direction of the creature to illuminate the field of view. The two beings stopped and looked at him. This was the first time the creatures acknowledged the presence of the people watching them. He said their eyes didn't glow, but reflected green as the red projectile shot by. He said it was like any cat or raccoon eye you'd see on the road. One of the twins bolted down the dirt road, less than a mile back to his grandparents' house. The other twin screamed, "Shoot it." He fired another tracer round over the creatures' heads, at which point the larger of the two creatures slowly reached over and touched its smaller companion's shoulder, at which point the smaller creature started walking in a straight shot back to the glowing trees, while the larger one held its ground and stared at George Kowalczyk. Having quite enough of this, Kowalczyk fired 3 normal rounds at the unwavering silhouette. He believes all 3 hit it. He said it sounded like when you shoot a lake. The creature flinched from the impact of the rounds, but continued to stare at the man who shot it 3 times. It didn't go down. Kowalczyk and the remaining boy got into the truck and retreated. Fortunately, the other boy who ran home was safe. Dr. Paul Johnson, who conducted the interview, found no lie or deceit in George Kowalczyk, who didn't care about having his name released. This happened, as far as he was concerned, and it disturbed him greatly. Kowalczyk told Johnson that soon after the event, the twin that fled suffered what some would call a nervous breakdown, and what some would call something else. He had reoccurring visions of explosions and buildings falling, and cities on fire. According to George, he suffered some kind of psychological damage from the ordeal. Immediately after the sighting, Kowalczyk called the police, and they arrived on scene. There were no creatures, and no craft, of course, but the officers did note an orange glow, described as, quote, hanging in the air. The report made it unclear whether or not the police attributed this to normal, if not atypical lighting conditions, or if they thought it was something else. Dr. Johnson interviewed no less than 12 other unrelated witnesses who viewed the red craft or its orange glow, but none of them saw any creatures, but they wouldn't have been close enough to do so. And this was one of the many cases wherein law enforcement put a witness in contact with Gordon's team. Dr. Johnson concluded that this outrageous story is consistent with other reports in the surrounding townships. He also concluded that, geographically at least, the location of the sighting was consistent with the other witnesses who saw the craft or its glow on that October night. Johnson believed it, if that helps at all. Another report of Bigfoot, ostensibly being more than simply Bigfoot, involved one motorist who claimed to hit a Sasquatch. And though his car had damage from the creature, he claims it vanished a moment after the impact. Vanished as in disappeared, not ran away. His sedan also had what appeared to be claw or nail marks on the trunk of the vehicle, which the alleged collision would not have accounted for, disappearing or not. Another report that cannot be lumped into the shy, forest giant hypothesis occurred in a place called Sleepy Hollow, some distance outside of Derry, in Westmoreland County. A man was fishing when he claims to have encountered a Bigfoot with a description like no other I've ever heard. The man heard a shrill cry in the night. Then he saw a large figure coming down the stream, silhouetted against the bubbling water. It seemed to be shuffling its feet, and slowly swinging its arms, well over its head. The man retreated to his car and went to leave, when the creature, impossibly fast, got to the man's car and stuck its head inside the driver's side window. The witness said it had no teeth, but gum impressions, implying that it once did. The creature appeared to have mange, as it had splotches of hair, rather than a coat of fur. Its hair was longest on the top of the head, and frayed backwards and down. It was very tall. Its hands fell below its knees. But oddly enough, the aspect that the witness found the most strange was that the creature had no discernible smell. In fact, he said if anything, it smelled sterile. Any animal, or person for that matter, should have had a smell in those close quarters. But the subject of his report was odorless. He slammed the horn, and it reversed its head out the window. It stood beside the car as the driver sped off. The witness said that in the rearview mirror, the creature waved at him, in a way he could only describe as the way you wave at a neighbor when you see them pull out of their driveway. One of the various cluster points of the anomalous activity was the Superior Trailer Court, an area that had Bigfoot reports consistently for decades, since long before the crash. Here in 1974 was only one of few times where the Westmoreland investigation team encountered one of the strange, plain-clothed people who seemed to maintain a minimal presence, at least, in the town since something came down in 1965. Gordon and his team investigated a woman claiming to be awoke by her dog, and upon turning on an outside light, she distinctly saw what she called a Bigfoot looking at her. The occurrence was documented and detailed by Gordon's team, just as they had so many others in that court. But 4 days after the investigation, Gordon personally received a call from the witness. The woman said that an odd man in a suit was currently at her trailer, and she found his behavior disturbing. His vehicle had Ohio plates, and he had some kind of ID card on his suit that had no name, just Ohio Research Center, or Ohio Research Institute. Ohio something she couldn't quite recall. She claims that he walked around the area for hours, taking pictures of the ground, both at alleged creature impressions, which were not deep or castable because of the ground at the time, so there was really no detail to speak of, but he snapped pictures of random patches of grass. She said he wasn't exactly treating his camera like a camera, if that makes any sense. In fact, his behavior was disturbing for a number of reasons. First, the fact that he was on someone's private property seemed to be totally lost on him, as if he was completely ignorant of the fact that it is rude or invasive to start walking around someone else's property and take pictures of everything and everyone you see. He was also described as displaying childlike behavior. Not merely immature, but that he talked and moved like a child. In an effort to be friendly, one of the neighborhood boys showed him a picture that he had taken of the best print the morning after the sighting. The mysterious Ohio man snatched the photo and crumpled it up and shoved it in his pocket. He laughed. He found it very funny. At this point, another neighbor who had been skeptically observing the stranger said he was calling the police. And the strange man sprinted. Not hurried, not ran, but basically fell over himself in a dash. He peeled out of the driveway so haphazardly that witnesses told the responding police officer that they thought the car was in danger of rolling over. Gordon actually passed the Ohio-plated Camaro on his way to the scene. It was well known to the Westmoreland investigators that the odd-acting men had not really left the area since whatever happened almost 10 years ago. A government official, or at least someone who identified himself as such, contacted Gordon in 1975. He identified himself as a representative of the Bureau of Sport Fisheries, Bird and Mammals Lab. Gordon was rather pleased that his inquiries may be getting some actual attention. The official gave Gordon a D.C. address to mail any convincing evidence. Gordon sent reports, photographs, and various samples of substrates with bizarre properties. But he never heard from them. nor could he verify that such an organization, called the Bureau of Sport Fisheries, Bird and Mammals Lab, actually reached out to him, or even existed. It was a more trusting time, I suppose. Barry Clark was part of the investigative team, and when he joined, he didn't know that investigating these anomalies would be a mistake with consequences he would suffer the rest of his life. Initially, he joined because he said that the Bigfoot sightings had become so common in his home of Derry that almost everyone was, quote, either related to or knew someone with a believable encounter. So he concluded that there must be something going on. And it seems he was correct. Clark received a call from the Bell family farm, not to be confused with the Bell Witch legend in Tennessee. The report said that the residents of that farm had observed for the past 3 consecutive nights a, quote, big star appear around 10 p.m. It would then radiate between hues of red and silver, and its intensity varied. And sure enough, this is exactly what Clark observed. After watching the light for 10 minutes, he said that it flashed 5 times like a, quote, arc from a welder. Then it radiated multiple specks of light into itself. He describes these tiny lights as white, but as they were drawn into the star-like light, they either became red or reflected red from the main object. The light's glow began to grow, and it started to come down. The witnesses fled, and Barry soon followed. It was that night he resigned from the team. It was something to the effect that he didn't want to know what that was, and if it is being kept a secret, that may very well be for a good reason. And though poor Barry was done with the paranormal, the feeling wasn't mutual. Soon after witnessing activity in the sky that night, he experienced an episode of what he called missing time. He was making a short drive through his local roads, and when he arrived at his destination, he noticed that several hours had passed. He has no memory of anything unusual about the drive that should have only been a couple of minutes. He left during the day, and when he got there, it was night. These episodes would occur infrequently, but persist for the rest of his life. Barry does not claim or assert that he was taken by anything, as is often the explanation for missing time. But he has no explanation, and he had no claim of any paranormal or even unusual events before he saw that craft from the Bell farm. He says he has a grandson that was born in the 80s. When the boy turned 10, he started saying that every night, people would crawl in from a hole in the ceiling and try to talk to him. He said they were like shadows. And he is convinced that his grandson's paranormal experiences may somehow be linked to the night that the light came down at Bell Farm. Orb-carrying Sasquatch and Bigfoot that don't go down. Some odorless and toothless. Bright lights in the sky. Strangers, prophetic visions, missing time, and talking shadows. What was happening here? What even allegedly happened here? Can we select the parts we want and are okay with while rejecting the strange and the apparently impossible? Is that an arbitrary line? Maybe. I want to be very clear. I don't subscribe to the Bigfoot UFO connection theories. I am not fazed by the possibility of a large, undiscovered primate that has even to date eluded our best attempts to catalog it. If such a creature exists, its level of environmental awareness, with that brain size and physicality, would be nothing short of superhuman. Perhaps literally. Though I will admit, I do not think the painting is complete. And though I don't indulge in Gordon's obvious conclusions, that doesn't mean I ignore or disrespect them. It's hard because so many people have trouble disagreeing without getting angry. Stan Gordon's books are certainly interesting, as they are filled with apparent due diligence. And he admits that he has never experienced or documented anything on the level of what happened in Westmoreland County in the early 70s. I suppose in order to answer if there is a Bigfoot UFO connection, first you must ask if there is a human UFO connection. And that, well, that's a numbers game. Anyway, make sure you like this video, Subscribe for more soon-to-come content. And as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.